please join us in welcoming Chief Commercial Officer of Allegiant, Drew Wells, in discussion with Skift Airlines reporter Meghna Maharishi.
Welcome, Drew. It's so nice to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, so let's get started. In July, Allegiant got a new CEO, and he had a mandate to focus more on the airline side of Allegiant. Can you tell me a little bit more about how Allegiant's strategy is changing under this new leadership?
Sure, and it's a great question, and I don't view it so much as change as kind of coming back to our roots. You know, Allegiant has been a phenomenal aviation story for a really long time, creating something that's very different than anything that had been presented to the U.S. public before, and kind of returning that focus to what made us great is where we want to go, and that's, you know, restoring utilization and using our aircraft to their fullest extent, you know, focusing on the nonstop travel, all of the things that really make us unique, really make us as different from the other ULCCs as the others are from the legacy carriers, frankly.
What are the challenges that you've faced in these past few months?
So a number of challenges, as probably most in the space would talk about. You know, for the last couple of years, we've dealt with pilot headcount constraints, which has limited our ability to fly the extent we'd like during the peak periods like summers and spring breaks, holidays. We had put in a sizable, for our size, order with Boeing. Those planes have been delayed for 15, 18 months. You know, really happy to talk about the first one coming in September, into service at the end of October, with line of sight to a few more by year end. But you know, even well-laid plans sometimes don't come to fruition exactly on the timeline you'd hope. But a lot of this is in the rear view, right? We have the pilot headcount we need to operate, you know, 17% growth in December, mid-teens growth in the first quarter of next year. A lot of these things really are coming to fruition.
Yeah, and on the Boeing delivery delays, we'll touch on that soon. And just for the audience, if you have any questions for Drew, feel free to ask them in the Stova app, and we'll try to get to them towards the end of the session. Your new CEO, Greg Anderson, he's also been very vocal about streamlining a lot of Allegiant's operations. Can you tell me a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, and some of it is returning to that focus, right? I mean, we had really positioned ourselves to be a significantly larger entity than we ended up becoming, and we talked about some of the reasons for why that happened. But coming out of 2021, demand was really ripping. We had our new order in place. We thought we'd be 20-30% larger through 22 and 23, but for one reason or another that we discussed, we didn't quite get there. But the rest of the infrastructure had grown to be able to support that. So we kind of kept seeing this drag, right? A lot of these fixed costs were not being utilized to the fullest extent they could. And we finally had that introspection, that look in the mirror of saying, look, we can't continue to do this. We can't continue to be 20-30% larger from an infrastructure perspective to what we in reality can achieve. And so even as we bring on the first Boeing aircraft, even as we have a pilot headcount getting to the point we need, there were other pieces that we really needed to scale back and get to be back to a leaner fighting machine that makes, you know, Allegiant great.
Yeah, and on that MAX 8, I know you just recently integrated it into your fleet. What role is the MAX 8 going to play in Allegiant's growth strategy going forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's really our aircraft of both growth and replacement over the next several years. A part of our fleet is somewhat old, late 90s vintage Airbus, so it'll help us kind of bring youth into the fleet. Beyond that, it's an incredible operating economic vehicle. So we'll reduce our operating costs by about 20% on every single flight, which will go straight to the bottom line, present more growth opportunities and ability to fly on days that maybe were a bit more marginal under the Airbus. Additionally, much greener aircraft than what we currently operate, and certainly much greener than when we had the 757 and MD-80s flying less than a decade ago at this point. So this really will be the backbone of how we look going forward. We'll continue to be players in the used market, looking at both now options for the Airbus and Boeing to help facilitate growth towards the tail end of this order. But it really does unlock a number of opportunities for us, just being that next generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for Boeing, they just got an agreement with their machinist union, and they said today that it could take a while for its factory to restart operations. How concerned are you about Boeing delivery delays?
Well, it took something like 15 months from our first scheduled delivery till we actually received it. So, there was a pretty high realized amount of concern that manifested. But with that, we had a number of aircraft that got nearly to delivery state. I do believe that we'll be able to receive probably somewhere 5 to 7 in relatively short order, and then to be determined from that. I don't know that I know enough about how Boeing will bring machinists back on and what it's going to take to get the build process going again. We're going to be fine as an airline. We have really great assets in the Airbus that we can extend a little bit if we need to, but really it's about what does the demand environment look like? How do we want to respond from a capacity perspective, and we'll make the right decisions from there. So nothing that keeps me up at night for sure. Definitely.
And I want to touch on routes, which shown in our Skift research presentation is one of Allegiant's strengths. So I'm curious, we have this route map here. There are a lot of other ultra low cost carriers who are cutting capacity in some of those oversaturated places. Is Allegiant seeing any room for opportunity in those more competitive markets, or is it just going to stick to the non-competitive ones?
Yeah, there's always a pretty big mix, and I know 85% was quoted here. We would probably put it somewhere closer to 75% of our routes that don't have competition, depending on how you think about the proxy markets. But in reality, we're looking for the best economic return that we can come across. Generally, that's coming from unserved routes, which I think makes a lot of sense from a typical supply and demand perspective. But that doesn't mean that's exclusively where potential comes from. There's a number of routes that are just too high priced and pricing people out of the market that provide opportunity for us, especially when we're focusing on 2-time, 3-time a week service, which is one of the big differentiators. Finding leisure travel on those peak leisure days exists broadly, right? If you're not trying to find something that you have to fly every single day of the week, it does create a unique opportunity set for you. So there's no one right answer to how we're going to approach growth, right? There will always be opportunities, we believe, on unserved markets, but we can be very selective and choose where to enter markets that do have overlap because we believe there's still an opportunity there. Pricing that's too high, to your point. Airports that have lost service, that creates new opportunity. A big wave of our growth and a number of the dots you see behind me, like a Cincinnati, a Memphis, had a lot of legacy traffic that went away as secondary hubs kind of collapsed, really. We're not as big of a priority for those airlines. It's a very fast-moving and fluid industry, which will continually create opportunities for us.
And how have those routes where Allegiant has come in after legacies or other carriers have left, how have those routes performed?
Great. I mean, take a Cincinnati, for example, where I believe we started that service in 2012, 2013, now has 20 plus destinations coming from it. There's a huge amount of opportunity that can be met when approaching it from a perspective like ours and frankly, some other airlines where you're focused on less than daily type of service. You're focused on leisure and VFR and not trying to just be that next carrier going to some of the largest cities.
And what about Florida? I feel like Florida has been one of those places where a lot of low-cost carriers have been cutting capacity since it's so competitive and oversaturated, but it seems like Allegiant has been pretty bullish on Florida. Do you still feel that way?
Absolutely. I mean, there's two sides to that coin, right? Even if several seats have been added into an Orlando or a Tampa, St. Pete area, that doesn't mean that the other side of that route is oversaturated. And in the case of most of our routes, there's zero saturation, right? It's what we've brought to the market. So there will always be probably concerns around air traffic control and how do you get that many aircraft through the space. But from a demand and passenger perspective, more seats into Orlando doesn't mean more seats on the other side of that route pair that we're serving. And again, what makes us unique.
And as for Florida, Florida just had 2 devastating hurricanes, Milton and Helene. Is there any concern about Florida going forward?
Certainly some. I think Asheville in particular in North Carolina from Helene has a bit more work to do to get back to kind of its full demand profile. Florida has responded really well. We had expressed a lot of concern on the earnings call, trying to still work through how much lingering demand impact there would be. I think it's responding fairly well. Asheville, we'll probably still be talking about in the first quarter. I think it's most of the way back, but there's going to be some lingering impact.
Yeah, definitely. And again, I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Stova app. We'll definitely get to them towards the end of the session. I'm also curious, just going off of our last Skift research presentation, There have been a lot of naysayers on the ultra low cost carrier model. You've got some executives saying that it's broken, or other executives saying that these ultra low cost carriers can't pull off pushes into premium or any other business changes. And in DC recently, the head of the trade association that oversees a lot of these ultra low cost carriers said that they were in a perilous time. What is your response to those concerns and criticisms?
I think first and foremost, I'd come back to one of my earlier comments. Right? I truly believe Allegiant is as different from the other ULCCs as they are from legacy carriers. Because we have a unique network setup, because we have a unique way of thinking about capacity deployment, it kind of leaves us to run our race. We'll certainly bump into other carriers. We'll fight for the same passengers occasionally with substitution of destinations. But broadly, I think what I would like to remind everyone is, a lot of what made ULCCs great wasn't just, cost control. It was the nimbleness, right? The ability to react very quickly to opportunity. And I think that still exists broadly through the space. All companies over time have to evolve in some way. Sometimes it's a bit more public than you'd like it to be. So I don't personally have concerns about the ULCC space. I think evolution is necessary, right? The legacies were really good about segmenting their product, and as they upgauged and had more seats per aircraft, they didn't have to fill as many of those economy seats in order to still be profitable because of the success of premium, because of their route makeup. So now the ball's kind of in the ULCC court. How do you respond to kind of a new environment, one that you weren't playing in just a few years ago? And I'll bet on the ULCCs to be able to find that way, find that nimbleness to survive and continue.
Yeah, and going off of your point on the legacies, basic economy has expanded a lot for them, and it's done really well in the past couple of years. Are you concerned that maybe the legacies have gotten too good at beating the ultra low cost carriers at their own game?
I don't know if I would go that far. And again, my perspective is somewhat different, right? We have 3-4% of routes that would see a basic economy. We're operating on those peak days of week. So we don't necessarily see the same overlap that, if Matt Klein had been able to join, would be able to talk to at more depth. So I don't think that that's the case. I am interested to see what Frontier and Spirit look like with their new front of cabin. Speaking to Allegiant, before the pandemic, we had started down a path of Allegiant Extra, right? A way of kind of blurring a segmentation of our own customer that maybe isn't looking for a first-class product, but it does value something like legroom, like being up in the front of the cabin would pay in excess of just that base fare, right? It doesn't have to be one homogeneous product across the entire plane. And so I think even at the ULCC level, there are these opportunities for finding the right kind of premium, the right kind of value proposition for the customer that does set it apart from the rest of the plane.
Yeah, and even with Allegiant Extra, I feel like just generally, even in these past couple months, we've seen a shift among ultra low cost carriers trying to add more extra legroom seats or premium products or bundling fares. Do you think those moves are smart for these carriers? Time will tell. I think doing nothing would have been the worst thing, right? You have to push and evolve, and hopefully, at least from where Allegiant Extra came from, our process was understanding that there's a subset of customers that this is the right product for them. They are buying the ancillary portfolio that we have to offer. How do we continue to find opportunities for our customers to find value? And that's what Allegiant Extra was born from, and presumably other ULCCs, as they're finding their premium approach, are responding to that customer data as well, and coming from a grounded place rather than simply a reaction to what they see in the demand world. So again, time will tell if it's the right or wrong call, but at least for Allegiant, the process to get there, I think, was sound. And as for Allegiant Extra, how has that performed so far for you guys?
It truly has been remarkable. For any aircraft with that layout on board, 180 seats, it's been worth $3 per total passenger. I mean, it really has been phenomenal for us, from taking out one row from our 186-seat aircraft and just adding the extra legroom there. So completely ecstatic with that. We'll be just over 50 aircraft here in a couple of weeks with that layout on board, and it just continues to look better and better.
Yeah, and I do want to briefly touch on labor. So I know Allegiant's pilots union voted overwhelmingly to authorize a strike, and that's been a big theme in the industry for the past couple of years. Where are negotiations headed so far?
Yeah, I mean, we've been in mediation with our pilots for, I believe, the better part of 3 years now. Continue to try to work through it. We definitively want to get to a contract with our pilots. We want something that's going to work well for both them and the company. And we'll keep working through that in mediation. As most of the audience is probably aware, the vote for the strike authorization does not mean that the pilots can go on strike yet. It's kind of a signal of intent that should they be released by mediation, should they be able to through in legal ways, they could go down that path, but this is not something that's imminent as far as we're aware.
Yeah, and I also want to touch very briefly on the election. I feel like that's been a decently big theme today, and we're going to have a different administration. I know the Biden administration was really big on price transparency and pushing out junk fees. Are there any changes that you're anticipating with a second Trump term?
Yeah, I'm not going to claim to be a political strategist or understand what may transpire, but maybe very generally, I do think there will probably be a bit more of a relaxed stance on M&A type of activity and what the DOJ may pursue. I think there were some perhaps tax-friendly aspects of the first term, but beyond that, I don't know that I have any great answers. I really like Allegiant's story regardless of who's in office, and I think there's an immense amount of runway to come, regardless of what happens there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Also, just touching on your point about mergers, in our research presentation, we talked about a Spirit Frontier merger, and there seems to be more talks on that. What do you view mergers as? Do you see it as a source of concern or a place of opportunity for Allegiant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I do think that it's likely the industry will see consolidation in some fashion over the next, call it 5-10 years. It's probably inevitable. Allegiant being so different from any other airline, it makes, for somewhat of a challenge to think about how it could pair with someone else. That's not to say that there's no opportunity for that, but I would view it as fairly unlikely anytime soon.
Yeah, and it looks like we're getting some questions in from the audience. Again, if you have any, feel free to put them in the app. So I guess one question we have from the audience is, do you think low cost and transatlantic service are mutually exclusive?
Historically, that answer is an unequivocal yes. I don't know that will be the case forever. We've certainly tried as an industry a number of times in a number of different ways to make this work. It just seems really hard to see it happening. Obviously, with every passing generation of aircraft, the economics get a little bit better and a little bit better, and so everything is relative. So perhaps in time, the actual operating economics of an aircraft make this viable, but I don't see it happening in the near term.
Yeah, and we've also seen some ultra low cost carriers expand internationally, whether it's routes to Mexico or the Caribbean. Are there any plans for that for Allegiant?
Absolutely. We've had an application in for a joint venture with Viva in Mexico for transborder flying. We had tried a couple of times before to go down this path to Mexico flying as well. It's just such a natural extension of the Allegiant route map and what we do so well of finding and underserved opportunities to some of the best leisure destinations currently in the U.S., but extending that to Mexico and potentially eventually the Caribbean. I think makes a lot of sense. It's really core to who we are as an airline and what our customers want. So unequivocally, yes.
And this is another audience question. Even as going off of your point on Viva, Allegiant had an equity investment in Viva a few years ago. Looking forward to the future, are you going to look more for those airline-related investments?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything to talk about in the near term, and kind of coming back to what we talked about with Greg Anderson, right? And a really core focus on making the airline back to what it should be from a profitability perspective, from a focus perspective. I think there will be opportunities in time, but absolutely not something that I foresee here in the short term.
Yeah, and even for staffing, there's another audience question. How important is the staffing strategy to your operating margins in terms of bringing the crew home every night?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important piece, but probably not something that's important forever, right? There's always this balance of how you're utilizing kind of all of the assets, right? So you're talking about your crew members and how efficient you can be with them, how efficiently you're using the airport space that's available to you, how efficiently you're using your aircraft. And for the entire history of Allegiant, it has always made sense to have those crew members come home every night, right? It's predictable, it makes for a great quality of life, and you're avoiding all of the hotel and travel expense associated with it. As you grow, as you evolve, as you respond to what your crew members are telling you, I could see a world where there's some finite number of aircraft that are roaming a little bit, right? Crew members that are already coming, away from their home to their actual domicile, that they're indifferent if they're staying overnight in Las Vegas or if they're staying in Fargo, for example. So I think it's something you could see Allegiant be more open to as we grow a little bit, trying again to keep all three of those components balanced. But time will tell on that.
Yeah, and I know we previously talked about Allegiant Extra. Are there any more changes to the customer experience that Allegiant is planning for?
Certainly always kind of top of mind for us is making sure that we have the right product mix to our customers, making sure that how we present the website, how we present ourselves on board is always staying top of mind. As we are, 8 years into our loyalty program, do we have the right product mix with the loyalty program? How are we presenting that to the customer? So there's certainly a lot more that we need to do. For example, well, maybe not a UX perspective. On board the Boeing, we have USB connection power, which I believe is a first in the ULCC space. So again, always trying to evolve and not stay too stuck in what we know worked well for us in 2005, 2010, et cetera.
Yeah, and even as for Allegiant and all these other ultra-low-cost carriers that have been making changes to their customer experience, how do you continue to expect to maintain costs low while integrating these changes?
Yeah, it's an excellent question and key to being successful, right? I mean, part of this comes back to the focus and ensuring that, as you chase down any kind of project, you're doing it for the right reasons, right? You have put forward the best look you can into that return on the investment, and not letting yourself get too far ahead, as Allegiant's done, other airlines have done, right? Letting that infrastructure grow by 20, 30%, thinking that growth was around the corner, and hey, it just didn't materialize. So all of these will be done, with ideally a core ROI in mind. Things that are very customer focused are tough, right? How do you think about the pool of customers that are willing or unwilling to consider you as an airline, depending on the product mix that you have, is a big challenge and one that Allegiant, along with every other carrier, has to encounter on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess we have got room for maybe one more audience question. I guess this is one from the audience. What can you tell us more about the state of labor relations with your employees?
Sure. So 4 groups are unionized, 3 of which we have active contracts with. Relations have been phenomenal through that. We've recently, I guess most recently, signed our deal with our flight attendants and have seen attrition come to all-time lows. I think we have a really good relationship forming there. I've spent, along with Greg and our CFO, Robert Neal, have spent the better part of the last 2 years on the road a lot, talking with our frontline crew members and pilots in particular. I think there's a really good relationship that's forming there. They too want to get a contract done, obviously. But being out there and getting the face time, talking with them, I think has really kind of created a better connection that candidly wasn't there before. We didn't always have leadership that was on the road and talking with our pilots, and I think candidly a little bit of a gap had formed, and we're working towards rebuilding that, right? Understanding what is important to them and again, balancing that against the needs of the company and trying to find that right solution.
Yeah, are you hopeful to reach a new agreement with your pilots soon, despite the vote?
Certainly hopeful. We'll keep working toward that. It is one of our top priorities to achieve. So much of it is out of our hands, but in terms of what we're hoping to get done through mediation, we're making progress and hopeful.
Yeah, and I guess maybe we got time for another audience question. Let's talk about Allegiant's credit card program. Do you foresee any expansion into the Allegiant World Visa credit card program?
Absolutely. I think for Allegiant, this has been a remarkable success, the credit card program. We're 8 years in, like I mentioned, and continue to see records in the amount of new card acquisition that we pick up. And this is on the heels of, call it 2 years of fairly little growth, right? We haven't had a lot of new routes, a lot of new cities by Allegiant standards. As we look into the future a little bit, right, I talked about December growth and growth in the first part of 25 and maybe the mid-teens. That's going to create a lot of opportunity for new customers coming into the fold, new opportunities to acquire new customers into the credit card. And other than shifting from MasterCard to Visa, we haven't done a lot in terms of reviewing the product mix and knowing what may be out there. So I have a very high level of expectation that we will look at that mix and make sure that we're still aligning with our customer needs and push this forward into the second set of 8 years.
And just very quickly, what can we expect to see from Allegiant in 2025?
Primary things, growth, right? Something we haven't experienced a lot of recently, because of all of the work that we put in for our pilot hiring and creating that connection. We have a headcount out there that we can grow 17% in December and feel good about maintaining operational integrity. Hopefully we'll see some new routes come back into the fold, maybe sooner rather than later, teaser. It really is a year of getting back to the core foundation of what makes us great. We'll have the Boeing out there. We'll have Allegiant Extra expanding. We have a phenomenal credit card program. And again, just core to what makes Allegiant great. And I'm really excited about that potential.
Yeah, definitely. We're all excited to see where Allegiant goes. Drew Wells, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Meghna.